Good afternoon. My name is Angela Ponmaca, and I'm the designated federal officer for the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. Welcome to all of our virtual attendees. Today begins day one of a two-day meeting to consider the Commission's final report to Congress and the President. This meeting is being live streamed to allow members of the public to attend the virtual meeting and is also being recorded, and all will be posted on our website. As we begin our live stream plenary meeting, allow me to share a few procedural remarks. This commission is an independent presidential advisory committee operating under the Federal Advisory Committee and the Government in the Sunshine Act. Today's meeting was announced in a Federal Register notice on Friday, January 8th, 2021. The public was invited to submit written comments for the commission to consider. 3 comments were received through our invitation and are considered public, which will be posted along with the meeting minutes. There's been one change to this meeting's agenda posted on the commission's website. The commission plans to address Chapter 6 of the final draft report tomorrow, and if time permits, it will cover Chapter 9 today. Depending on time constraints, there may be an opportunity for members of the public to provide written comments or questions to the commission today. For those joining us via the live stream on YouTube, you can provide comments or questions via our YouTube live meeting comment section and via Twitter by tweeting or messaging @AI Commission. With that, I say welcome and call this meeting to order. I now turn this over to the Commission's Executive Director, Ili Bayraktari, for opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ili Bayraktari, and I serve as the Executive Director of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. It is my pleasure to welcome commissioners as well as members of the public to the first day of the two-day plenary meeting to review and discuss the draft report. To members of the general public and media, on behalf of the NSCAI commissioners and the staff, I would like to thank you for your interest in the work of the Commission and for your participation in today's plenary meeting via our live stream. We have received almost 300 RSVPs from members of the public, along with 10 members of the press. The Commission remains eager to hear from you as we examine the most significant national security dimensions of the AI. As mentioned by the designated federal officer, those tuning in today can provide comments or questions via the YouTube comment function and Twitter. To NSCAI commissioners, the purpose of today's virtual public plenary meeting is to review and discuss the Commission's draft final report and recommendations to Congress and the executive branch. This document is a culmination of your work for the last 18 months and the guidance and feedback and conversations you have had over the last couple of months. An NSCAI commissioner will deliver introductory remarks on each of the final report's 16 chapters and present the set of recommendations for deliberation. NSCAI staff will assist in guiding the discussion as needed. The purpose of this two-day meeting is for you to review recommendations included in the materials we posted online on our website. Unlike our prior meetings, this two-day meeting will result in finding agreement on the various chapters, and then staff will continue to work and finalize the report and recommendations. A meeting to officially approve the final report and its recommendations will occur on March 1st, 2021. With that, I would like to ask Dr. Eric Schmidt, the chair, and Mr. Bob Work, the vice chair, to deliver a few remarks.
Well, thank you, Eli, and thanks everyone for joining. This is a FACA-compliant public meeting, and I want to emphasize our commitment to both transparency and openness in the process that we're following. I'd also like to take a minute and say how incredibly proud I am of the quality and commitment of both our commissioners as well as our staff. And I particularly want to highlight the diversity of such people. And I don't just mean people diversity, I mean diversity of views, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of technical skills, diversity of writing skills, diversity of every skill. And surprisingly, in this congressional process, we ended up with a representative team of America, which I'm very, very proud to be part of. So today is the 9th plenary. It's the first one we had was in the spring of 2019, and it's our first meeting since October. Much in America has changed. However, our commission's work remains the same, to provide nonpartisan recommendations related to AI that the administration and Congress can immediately implement to advance our national security and our national competitiveness. You'll hear a lot about this today and tomorrow. It's something we care a great deal about. I think, and I think I speak for the commissioners when I think that there's even more urgency now than when we started. The scientific advances leveraging AI continue to accelerate, and we need to do everything that we possibly can to make the good that AI can deliver happen. On the negative side, we've recently seen the damage wrought by cyber attacks and digital disinformation, and we can anticipate how much worse they could be when they're accelerated from AI at some point in the future. So we need to get AI right for America now. AI technologies will be a cornerstone of national competitiveness. Many scientific and engineering breakthroughs will leverage AI. And if I wanted to summarize the next few days for those of you who have not been following, I think that I would say that there are sort of three big themes. First is that we need to organize for AI and emerging technologies competition, right? Competition between ourselves and other countries and other institutions and so forth. And this is going to require sustained attention at the highest levels of government and serious investments to build America's digital infrastructure. We have a number of recommendations, many of which we've talked about in the past, that aim to improve the way we are organized, the way to accelerate AI adoption, to cultivate a new generation of talent, which is crucial, and to promote AI innovation for the benefit of all Americans. I think the Commission will say very clearly that we must field AI technologies for defense and intelligence purposes. Our men and women should have access to the best technology to defend the country. I think that's sort of obvious. And for the first time that I can remember, the commercial sector is actually better equipped than the government in leading the technology edge in this area. We must bring that technology into the military and the intelligence agencies in the right way. You'll hear a lot about this. And it's important to talk about our values, that we need to uphold democratic values at home and abroad. There's a general view that these values could be threatened by the actions of others. AI itself does not have an ideology, but it does matter who develops and uses it and for what purposes and under what rules. We must stand firmly opposed to their authoritarian uses of AI-enabled surveillance, for example. I think everyone here would agree. We believe that the United States can provide a model for how to use AI consistent with individual freedoms, sort of the American way, if you will, and it will lead to a digital coalition abroad to provide this democratic alternative to how we use these systems. So anyway, the point here is you'll see from the breadth of the recommendation that the Commission has been productive. I want to thank everybody for all their work and the staff, of course, for their fantastic work. We're going to have another fantastic conversation. Bob, let's hear what you have to think, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to echo both Illy and Eric's welcome to all of those who are joining us this afternoon. I hope you find the conversation enlightening. I want to start by reinforcing what Eric said. This has been a bipartisan mission from the beginning because it is a national priority to get AI right. So we want to thank our partners in the executive branch, Congress, and across the United States, including those who recently departed public service and those who are just beginning their own. Now, today and tomorrow, we're going to discuss our final report recommendations. They flow from two big principles that have consistently run through our work since our 2019 interim report. First, the U.S. government must field AI-enabled technologies to protect the nation. We are absolutely committed to doing this quickly and are confident that we can do so responsibly. Second, the U.S. government should do everything it can to help the United States win the global AI competition with the right mix of promotion and protection policies. We believe the United States is not yet prepared for the coming AI era, but we do believe that a clear strategy with specific sets of actions, if adopted, can get us started in this regard and get us well on our way to where we need to be. We've organized our report in two parts, each consisting of 8 chapters, and we'll discuss one part today and one part tomorrow. Part one, we title Defending America. It has 8 chapters. It covers the national security implications and applications of artificial intelligence. We will need major changes in how the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and other national security departments and agencies think, organize, train, and operate to adopt AI technologies and defend against emerging AI threats. This section also covers how to adopt AI responsibly and ethically for national security purposes. We have provided a series of recommendations to help the government use AI consistent with the rule of law and our values to protect Americans. Tomorrow we'll dive into part 2, which we call Winning the Technology Competition. It also consists of 8 chapters. They situate AI in the broader national security context. We need to develop a national technology strategy that ensures the United States has the right mix of policies to promote AI talent and innovation, preserve our hardware advantages, protect American intellectual property, and the integrity of our open research environment from adversaries, whoever they might be. Our run of show will be to review and discuss the recommendations by each chapter. Each topic chairperson will lead a 20-minute discussion or so, and if time allows, we'll have a few minutes for questions submitted from the public. By the end of tomorrow, we will provide guidance to the team, our staff, to draft the implementation plans for each of the recommendations the Commission endorses. We're going to start with the introduction and technical session, which should help frame the rest of today and tomorrow's work. I hope you enjoy the discussion, and we look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, let's start. I would like to turn our attention to the first topic of conversation, which is going over the introduction and the chapter called AI in Context. For that, I'll invite Seth Senner, our primary author, to review the general themes of the introduction, and then Mike Garris just to briefly talk about the chapter on AI in Context. Seth, over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Elliot. It's good to see everyone all together and in your Sunday best for a change. So the goal of the introduction is to set the tone for the report, establish the Commission's core judgments, and provide a runway for the chapters, which in turn provide the concrete recommendations for action. We've tried to navigate the tone carefully to reflect the consensus view of the commissioners through several iterations of meetings and written comments. It's a nuanced conclusion. We've tried to avoid pure advocacy. It's also not pure scholarship. It's designed to develop a set of arguments that flow to concrete proposals that then lead, hopefully, to government action. We've looked for a few different audiences, as both for the introduction and really for the whole report. Government, civil society, academia, the private sector, and of course, audiences abroad, friends and foe. We've tried to focus on our readers in Congress and the executive branch simply because we believe they have the largest burden for implementation and action. But we've tried to stay in dialogue with all of our audiences throughout the report and of course in our meetings as well. We tried to strike a series of balances in tone and judgments in the introduction as well as the full report. We're trying to strike a balance between the world-changing impacts of AI, its ubiquity, its adjacency to other technologies, and the need to take measured assessment of AI's current limitations. We've tried to strike a balance between the urgency of adopting AI for national security purposes and the need to do so ethically and responsibly. We've tried to strike a balance between the narrow national security and defense implications and focusing on the broader impact of AI on society and the economy as pillars of a long-term national security strategy. And we've tried to find a balance between stressing the AI competition with our closest AI competitor, China, and having a wider discussion of AI competitiveness and challengers in the world. Our basic framework in the introduction is on page 1 of the introduction, page 4 of the report, which is simply that AI technologies promise to be the most powerful tools in generations for expanding knowledge, increasing prosperity, enriching the human experience. And they will be employed by nation states to pursue their strategic ambitions. The United States, the Commission has argued, is not yet prepared for the coming AI era, but we still have a window to make the changes to build a safer, more prosperous, and better future. And we believe the two parts of the report through those 16 chapters provide the roadmap for doing so. The introduction itself lays out basically the core judgments or assumptions that'll underpin the chapters. And they're in the placemat. We have 4 basic judgments about why AI matters, 10 judgments about how what we must do to defend America in the AI era, 6 for winning the technology competition, and then 2 critical judgments about the relationship between values, technology, and AI. I just want to stress that on top of this, once this final report is approved by the commissioners, we will put a preface and an executive summary on top of this for the final report in March. That's our goal. So let me transition then to Mike Garris, our Chief Technical Advisor, to discuss briefly the technology section, and then we'll open up to a discussion with the commissioners. Over to you, Mike.
Hey, thank you, Seth. Based on commissioner input, the introductory section on artificial intelligence in context, it's a level-setting introduction as to what AI is from the commission's perspective. And this builds off the introductory remarks and the technical appendix in the interim report. Here we reiterate that AI is not a single piece of hardware or software, but rather a constellation of technologies. That the Commission's treatment on AI is broadly scoped as outlined in the authorization within the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act. And that AI can be thought of as a stack of interrelated elements consisting of talent, data, hardware, algorithms, applications, and integration. The section briefly discusses how we live today in the age of deployed AI, where AI is now ubiquitous, embedded in devices we use and interact with every day. And although forecasting the future of AI development is difficult, the section points to promising research frontiers, including, for example, human AI teaming, new ways of learning, edge computing, advances in reasoning, and toward more general AI. The section concludes with things to look forward to in an AI-enabled future, and particularly looking at areas of science, education, space, and healthcare. So I will pause here with this brief overview of AI in context and ask the commissioners if there's anything we're missing from this section or anything else we should capture. And if not, I'll turn things back over to Illy.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to open now the conversation for both documents. I just want to ask, does this capture your guidance and feedback and conversation? And then we can move on with the rest of the chapters.
Illy, that's Eric. In general, this does. I don't see a strong statement about how close China is to us. And you might want to make some kind of statement, which I've said publicly, of the form, we're ahead, but they're close behind, or some statement like that, whatever is technically correct.
Any other comments, feedback on both?
This is Gilman. I agree with Eric's statement. I think it's really important to emphasize that, at least for China, that they have a whole country effort. They see this as a strategic capability, not just from a national security point of view, but economic and a way of life. And I think we want to make sure that that's clear in the preamble of our documents, that there's not competition for the sake of competition.
Thank you, Gilman. Any other commissioners?
I have one other comment, which I've shared before, but I think it's also useful to point out that unlike the way that a lot of a lot of the balance of power over the years was considered in nuclear weapons and the very high costs of getting into nuclear weapons. Getting great at AI, which is where a lot of this, a lot of the fights moving forward between countries is going to be fought, that the barriers for entry there are so much lower. There's still not that many people in the world who are expert machine learning and AI practitioners, but there are more than enough and a lot being trained all the time. And it's a much lower barrier for entry, not just for China and for Russia, but for other countries as well, to use this capability to factor differently in world affairs.
Yeah, and to build on what Andy just mentioned, I think we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg with harnessing various of the AI technologies for cyber attacks of two kinds, on systems and infrastructure and on democracy. People's beliefs through psychological warfare tools, which have been, I think, to date, rather back of the envelope, but still we've seen the outcomes and how powerful they are.
I have to concur. I think it's said in the document in draft that I've read that we are in a competition. What I think is important is it's an invisible competition. This competition isn't something where you see tanks rolling down a street. This competition that we're engaged in is subtle. It is eroding at different levels. And as you read the document, you can see the multiple ways this can erode our ability as a nation to protect itself and withstand the future. And I think we say it, but I think what Eric and what Andy and Eric Horowitz are all speaking to is the strength of that opening argument. And perhaps it would go into the summary sheet, the cover sheet, about what invisible nature this particular competition has.
And I will concur that what the commissioner defined as invisibility is in a lot of ways very apparent, but not recognized by us in terms of how truly integrated this is in our lives, from the most basic of shopping functions to the most significant of national security functions. It has become incredibly organic, but what is not organic as of yet is our recognition and an approach to it as a whole of government or whole of nation approach.
I just wanted to underscore, it is mentioned in the introduction, but I wanted to underscore the speed of innovation that is occurring in artificial intelligence. It is really dramatic. And as my fellow commissioners have said, it's having impact, but I think we need to be cognizant that we're dealing with something that's moving very, very fast.
To build on what Mignon and Bill just said, and just to angle things a little differently, it's not all about anxiety and need to catch up and rivals. It's also about the promise of AI. As we've said many times in our deliberations, national security is not only about defense and military and intelligence, it's also about the vibrancy of our economy, our ability to harness AI technologies in all the myriad ways that it promises to be provide breakthroughs, whether it be material science, biomedicine, or daily life, per Mignon's comments.
Excellent. Any other feedback from commissioners about both, we call it a chapter 0 documents?
Well, I just want to
The one thing I could add.
The one thing I wanted to re-emphasize that Eric and some of the others brought up is that the information and dialogue aspect of the applications of AI, I would say that it's not the case that we're worried about future impacts of this. I think we are in a situation where the current impacts of influence in this arena are quite evident, and the challenge is to make sure that we can have the correct flow of information and counter manipulation of facts by adversaries, even as we speak today.
So what I was going to add, if you go back to, I think what Eric Horowitz said first, is the diffusion of this technology, and Andy Jassy said this as well, the diffusion of this technology is very different from any other arms that we've seen, because it's so easy to pick this up. And I think that the current introduction doesn't quite say that. So maybe, Seth, you could consider this point, that it's different because it's so easy for malcontents, other countries, the wrong people to get this stuff and get it in their hands.
All good points. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, hearing none. I think on behalf of the staff, I accept all your comments and edits, and we will come back to you for the next plenary with an updated intro. Since I don't think we had anything on the AI in context document for my guests, but Seth, I think you have guidance loud and clear from commissioners, and so we will update the document and present another version to them next month.
Check.
Thank you, Seth. With that, I'll start the conversation on part 1 of our report and chapter 1, which is focused on new threats in the AI era. I'll turn over to Commissioner Chris Darby to go over the presentation. The staff is standing by, and we look forward to the conversation with the rest of commissioners. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Ely, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to appear before you today in my capacity as a commissioner. My remarks are going to focus on how AI and associated technologies are ushering in a new era of society-level conflict that requires us to really reimagine national security. And my fellow commissioners discussed this a little bit just over the last few minutes. The new AI era converges with 2 existing national security phenomena. First, there's sensor proliferation and the wide range of digital interdependencies that are spreading the vulnerabilities across every segment of our society. Second, as we just heard, state and non-state adversaries are challenging the U.S. below the threshold of direct military conflict, using things like cyber attacks, espionage, political warfare, and financial instruments to threaten U.S. national security interests. And Eric specifically, I think, highlighted some of those just moments ago. But digging deeper, the Commission sees 5 illustrative threats that capture the organizational challenges the United States must face. The first is AI-enabled information operations. AI applications and associated technologies will increase the magnitude, the precision, persistence of malign information ops. Building on this year's NDAA mandate to form a new ODNI center around the problem, the government should create a true joint interagency task force within that center to lead and integrate public-private efforts to counter foreign-sourced malign information. The second AI-related threat is targeted data harvesting. Data security and integrity really need to be viewed through a national security lens. The broad circulation of personal data drives not just commercial innovation, but also new vulnerabilities. One key move, among others, is for the government to protect its own data from adversarial interference or theft by defending against privacy attacks, red teaming defenses, and ensuring that its databases are federated and anonymized. Thirdly, AI-enhanced cyber is an organizational challenge of this era. Through the threats, or though the threats are still developing, in the future, AI automated and enabled malware could make compromises such as the solar wind cyber attack orders of magnitude more effective, delivering greater precision tailoring, speed, stealth, and persistence at scale. To close the current gaps in our nation's cyber defenses, government should continue implementing the Cyberspace Solarium Commission's recommendations. To head off future threats and accelerate our countermeasures to the current threats, government should also develop and deploy AI-enabled machine speed information sharing, anomaly detection, and malware mitigation across its networks. There's a recurring theme here. We need to defend more rigorously. A fourth trend is called adversarial AI. Adversarial AI is really about what is being done to our AI systems. Adversarial attacks are here today and already impacting commercial machine learning systems, but remain neglected. Among other moves to improve AI assurance, the government should create government-wide red teams to attack and harden our own AI applications. The fifth and last representative threat of this new era in AI is AI-enabled biotechnology. It's certainly topical. New technologies such as CRISPR enable gene editing and basically make biology programmable. Combined with massive computing power and AI, innovations in biotech may provide novel solutions to mankind's most vexing challenges. Healthcare, food, and sustainability could all be addressed through AI. Biotech, sadly, can also have a dark side. AI may enable the engineering of genetically targeted pathogens or the mental and physical bioenhancement of adversary combatants. To address these threats, the government should increase the profile of biosecurity and biotech issues within the U.S. national security agencies and update the National Biodefense Strategy to include a wider vision of biothreats. And I'm sure the administration's new lead at OSTP, Eric Lander, will echo those sentiments. In summary, these 5 AI-related threats illustrate a new society level of conflict that the U.S. must organize and defend against. So, without further ado, I look forward to your discussion, questions, and comments, and I yield the floor, Ely.
Thank you, Chris. Over to you, commissioners, for feedback, guidance, anything that we have missed based on your feedback.
So can you take a minute and talk about the biosecurity threats in an unclassified setting?
Sure. It really, once we started to sequence everything, and I mean the human genome, plants, what we began to amass is a data set. And once we had it as a data set, it could be edited, and the CRISPR tool really began to edit it. And so there are very good reasons for editing organic matter. We could edit, for example, crops, Eric, that would grow with less water or be resistant to different diseases. We can edit for specific health issues. But again, it's a dual-use technology. Biotech can have a dark side, as I mentioned, and we need to understand the norms and values associated with what will govern the editing of biology as we go forward. Over.
Thanks, Chris. Eric,
Machine learning has been harnessed to drive the precision of how CRISPR actually works. It's an AI is a big part of the story right now, and the combination could lead to new kinds of tools. Synthetic bio people have continued to say over the years, don't be too concerned, or invest in us is maybe a better approach, because we'll need to respond quickly to bio threats. And by building up our expertise, we'll be able to quickly sense and respond to potential threats of various kinds, whether it be a future custom tailored virus that can cause a selective response, or a pandemic, or something used in military settings.
I'd like to put a little positive spin also into this technology space. The application of biotechnology has the ability to protect us against threats, as well as build the threats. The theme that you'll see in the writing of this report shows that dual technology. So we have, as a commission and as a nation, a need to understand both sides to the story. And I think it'll come out in the narrative as well that we have the ability to influence how we use that technology and preserve and protect our morals and values in its use as we do it. So as we see the democratization of biotechnology and the expansion of the dual use applications, we need to be, of course, sensitive to our nations that don't share our values, but work with the nations that do share our values to strengthen our ability to use these technologies appropriately and defend against when they're not used appropriately.
This is Gilman. I think for both the bio side as well as the cyber side, there's a theme that's important for us to hit hard, and that is the use of AI in coordinating much more aggressive use of sensors to be able to attack threats before actual execution happens, and be able to have AI work with humans to develop coordinated responses. The issues that are true in the organic and biological world are also true in the cyber world. In both cases, our inability in COVID-19 on a global scale to coordinate aggressively and to sense. The same thing on the solar winds, our inability to sense across many, many different networks left us vulnerable. I think AI and ML can go a long ways in helping us have sense making at machine speed.
Hey,
This
Chris.
is Mignon. One of the things that I wrote down, I especially wrote this down, and hopefully it will come across in a coherent way at the end of this particular chapter, and is the must of the U.S. Being, I would say, defensive here, because even when, and it's not if, it's a when, we hold true to our values, our mores, and our standards, we have to recognize that not everyone is not going to embrace those standards, those mores. And so part of the challenge for us as we uphold those standards is a recognition that we must be prepared and aware of those who do not conduct themselves in the same way. And oftentimes that is a hard message to get across for those who have fully embraced, our mores, but embrace, or we must. We have to be prepared, and we have to, be prepared when you stand for something. You have to be prepared to uphold that, and that clearly is going to be a part of the messaging function, and it is in here, but I really think it cannot be emphasized enough.
Thank you, Mignon.
Hey, Chris, really quickly, given your expertise also on the national intelligence side, what's your sense of whether we have the capabilities and investments in intelligence on global developments in science and technology to anticipate or even detect these applications of AI to adjacent technologies? Over.
Well, I think you've got incredibly capable people within the IC, and it's a question of where are the various asks being prioritized, as you well know, Jason. And I think what we need to do is we need to continue to shine a light on prioritizing biotech and the emerging biotechnology arena as it applies to AI, but more generally for the IC, so that the IC understands and feels empowered to leverage their capabilities in that particular space. The whole question in my mind is, how fast can we go from bug to drug, I think is the phrase that people use when a pathogen or something like that appears, how fast can we get a vaccine developed and rolled out at scale? Our nation needs a strategy in that space, and I think AI plays a significant role in the answer. Over.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments on this?
I just wanted to make thanks, Ely. I wanted to just make a comment on the adversarial AI front. This area is a very young area of research. It's interesting. There's a bunch of new results. But the one thing we've learned over the last several years is that as a counterbalance with all the enthusiasm of AI and its application, we're seeing how brittle the methods are to directed attacks of various kinds with now a family of names, from data poisoning to model stealing to other kinds of disruptions that can be done with AI systems. So the call for investment and mastery of this area, and also just to know where we can't depend on robustness, is going to be critical.
Thank you, Dr. Horowitz.
I'd like to add something to Eric's comments. One of these challenges is that in many of these technology domains, defending is inherently much harder than attacking, because when you defend rather than attack, you are in a situation where you lose the initiative, and you can only fail once in defense. And so one of the balances in all of this is that we have to retain the strategic options for our decision makers. So the deterrence often is a more practical path than a pure defense strategy.
I also think that one of the lessons we've learned in the software world is, it's not just about, creators, defenders, and defenders. The creators have a responsibility to test, validate, and try to make systems as robust as possible up front. So we can't simply say it's somebody else's responsibility to, deal with the brittleness of the things that we create. And so we need to have a much more holistic view when we create these algorithms and approaches, and we start to implement them in these mission critical systems.
Thanks, Gilman. Just to keep us on track, I would like to ask if there are any major heartburns with this chapter, something you disagree. We got your feedback now. We will update the chapter based on this feedback. But if you have any big disagreements, any criticism, I'll open it now for the next 2 minutes before we move on.
I think the part on malware is a very small subset of the cyber attacks, and we may want to broaden to, include some novel things that will come out of AI and ML in the cyberspace. That's more than the conventional attacks. We learned that supply chain attacks and the SolarWinds.
Copy, Gilman will do it. Any other comments, feedback, criticism? Those of you online, you can still post questions on YouTube or Twitter, and I'll try to squeeze it in as much as we can given the time we have in front of us today. All right, listening to all the comments and feedback, we will take action and come back to you all with an updated version based on what you gave us today. I want to thank Chris Darby for leading this effort. Thank you so much, Chris. And I would like us to move to Chapter 2. And I would like to ask Ms. Safra Katz to lead the conversation and present the chapter context and recommendation. Over to you, Safra.
Thanks, Ely. Good afternoon. Over the course of the Commission's work, I've been privileged to work on the line of effort focused on applying AI for national security missions with my fellow commissioners, Steve Chan, Ken Ford, Andy Jassy, Katrina McFarland, and Bob Work, who you've already met. Through our line of efforts research, we have reached the judgment that U.S. military advantage is not guaranteed. To maintain it into the future requires accelerated adoption of AI-enabled sensors and command and control, weapons, and logistics systems. However, to fully leverage AI, the DoD must first lay the foundation for its integration by investing in a common digital infrastructure that is accessible to internal AI development teams and critical industry partners. 2, building a technically literate workforce. And 3, adapting organizational structures and core processes to enable agility and rapid technology adoption. The urgency of this undertaking demands aggressive action. Our competitors are moving to harness AI with commitment and speed, and we believe the DoD should have the foundational elements that enable the ubiquitous application of AI in place by 2025, if not sooner. Integrating AI into existing systems and operations is difficult across sectors, public and private. The challenges that DoD faces are significant. They span the technical, structural, and cultural domains. Many of these obstacles are not unique to AI. However, the strategic imperative of embracing AI for national security brings them into sharp focus. Notable among them are budget, acquisition, and development practices that remain largely tuned for the industrial age. Change will not be easy. It demands leadership and prioritization from the Secretary of Defense and committed partners in Congress. It also requires the promotion of bottom-up innovation, getting AI into the hands of our technologists and warfighters. Failure to do so will spell dire consequences. We recommend that the Secretary of Defense direct immediate action in 5 areas. First, build the technical backbone. To integrate AI across the organization, the department needs to invest in a DoD-wide digital ecosystem, including compute, data, trained models, and environments for development and testing. Second, train and educate warfighters, which my colleague Minion Clyburn will cover in more detail once I finish. Third, accelerate the adoption of existing digital technologies. The department must scale innovative practices and align acquisition, budget, and organizational structures to better support the delivery of digital-enabled capabilities. To do this, we recommend prioritizing the integration of commercially available AI solutions for core business processing, networking existing innovation initiatives, expanding the use of specialized acquisition pathways and contracting approaches through a trained and incentivized acquisition workforce, and the reforming the budget and oversight process to account for speed. Fourth, democratize AI development. At every level, technologists, operators, and domain experts should function as integrated teams. To support enhanced development, the DoD should designate the Joint AI Center, the JAIC, as the department's AI accelerator. Additionally, the combatant commands should take complementary action to establish software teams and embedding developers with operational units to locate, tailor, and field AI applications. Fifth, invest in next generation capabilities. To make the prior recommendations possible and preserve the ability to deter adversaries, the DoD must take tough budget trade-offs and must increase spending on AI research and development. And with that, I'll turn it over to Minion, who sits on our workforce line of effort to provide amplifying details on the recommendation to train and educate warfighters.
Thank you so much, Safra. The Department of Defense must equip service members with core competencies to effectively employ AI, make data-driven decisions, engage in regular experimentation, and interact with autonomous systems. This will require early identification of technical talent, required technology training for junior and senior leaders, and emerging technology coded billets and certification pipelines. The importance of technology literate senior leaders cannot be overstated. Our most important recommendation is for Congress to pass a Goldwater-Nichols 2.0. It would create an emerging and disruptive technology qualification process and billets for military officers or non-commissioned officers. We believe this will help create a technology literate group of senior leaders, just as the original Goldwater-Nichols Advanced Joint Competencies. Competencies. We need it so badly until I needed help saying it. So thank you so much, Safra, and back to you.
Thank you, Minion. I'll now open the floor to my colleagues from line of effort 1, 2, and 3, who all contributed content to this chapter for additional amplifying comments, as well as to the broader group for discussion.
This is Andrew Moore, one of the commissioners from Line of Effort 1. One of the things I find particularly valuable about this is over and over again within the industry, we've all seen that the organizations, the industrial organizations which have a culture of AI practitioners at every level, rather than some sort of separate mystical sort of top-down group, those folks who sort of bring it into the culture in general, those are the what we now call the digital natives. The companies which are able to prosper in this fully sort of digital world. And so that's why I really appreciated that focus on this chapter's care in making sure that there's AI people throughout all of these organizations.
Yeah, I was also very pleased in the work in the group is that the emphasis on not only the technology part, but the sociological and the people background part is strongly emphasized. And I want to credit that and also state that one of the key ways to do that is to rotate people through the different phases of the different elements of the organization, to give sort of the more operational people more exposure to the technical aspects, and the technical people more exposure, or the technology people more exposure to the operational aspects of the mission.
One of the things I'd like to talk to this broader community to that is in this report that has me concerned is our ability to adopt existing digital technologies. I can recall 10 years ago when this was a conversation that was going on that we needed to be more commercially adept. We can't assume that using the same practices is going to accomplish something different. So we need to underscore what Nignan and the team talked about. We have to change the organization in order to change the outcomes. And those are inclusive of processes and the bureaucracies that we face right now. The adoption of commercial technologies does not fit when we, if we do not allow for this change, don't exclude the changes that are necessary inside the organization that don't necessarily fit with the commercial technologies. We tend to lean towards retaining our own structure and then trying to adapt a commercial application to it. That cannot change future. It cannot allow for this advancement. So I have to underscore this is a big change, and it's not just the use of the technologies, it's the people and the change in how we look at the ownership of that responsibility.
So Safra, this is Eric. did you all consider putting in real numbers, quotas, size of organization to force through some NDAA process the hiring of these AI experts? So I'll give you an example. You could write down that I think there are roughly 7 COCOMs, something like that. You could write that every COCOM should have 50 to 100 people who have this criteria under the command of the COCOM commander. In other words, somewhat more explicit than just the urging language that you've spoken of so far.
So this is always very, very tricky because these kinds of things really do require an understanding of the situation as it stands. What we did do is we recommended an amount of spending, a percentage of spending, which again is tricky too. It often translates into the number of people and things like that. But I think it's very difficult. I don't know if some of the other if some of the staffers want to comment, but the issue is it's very hard to be so prescriptive.
Yeah, I have to support what you're saying, Safra. When we looked at that, there's something called malicious obedience. If you as an individual don't want to make change because you don't understand it, you're going to change exactly, which can actually be more damaging to what you've been directed to do and not accomplish the outcome. So to give an objective outcome and to state that where we felt the amount of funds were necessary, I think is the appropriate way to get somebody to come in with an answer that works, vice being prescriptive and directing them specifically how to do it.
The only thing I would say is, I mean, I agree with what was just said, but I also think Eric's point is a reasonable one. I mean, sometimes you just need, for illustrative reasons, to kind of give people an idea of the dimension of what other serious-minded, effective AI and machine learning organizations are doing. It's possible there may not be an understanding of what the magnitude of the investment needs to be. And so it's, if we can find figures that give people an idea and give the government an idea of what really effective AI organizations are investing, I think it's a good idea.
I think what's really important, besides the dollars for scale, is also the importance for us to point out that, particularly within the Department of Defense, that we must be willing to apply this class of technology to disrupt the organizations as they stand today. We've had a long history of applying new technologies in old ways until an adversary comes along and uses it in a novel way. We should challenge ourselves and maybe even set aside some of the scope of the budget to build a capability where we disrupt ourselves rather than wait until the adversary does it. You know, we think of the way the department is organized, it's very much still organized like the way it was in World War II. You know, there's a group of people who know how to deploy tanks. There's a group of people who know how to deploy ships. There's a group of people who know how to fly airplanes. In fact, in the old days, it was the Army Air Corps. It took airplanes 50 years to break out from where they were. We can't wait. This is critical. So we have to disrupt ourselves, and we need to figure out what the level of effort, and that's why some scoping of dollars is going to be really important.
Scoping of dollars, yes, but specifying a one-size-fits-all for organizational structure is not going to work. What I would be doing for the special forces is very different from what I would be doing for the Navy, which is very different from what I'd be doing for the Commerce Department. And I've never seen a one-size-fits-all recipe for AI change management. I do think we should celebrate the expertise that each of the services and government departments has, make sure they are empowered with knowledge about how to do AI, but we've got to use their expertise and how they field it.
Yeah, see, I think that some of the things we do in this group is structurally oriented, which is very important at the DoD, where we basically say you have to embed all the way down to the warfighters, technical people with them, which I think results very, very well. We've also had structure changes with who runs the JAIC and how, and we're also talking about USD R&E coordinating a lot of the R&E effort. And I think that structural changes, by the way, these are very significant structural changes. And I think we'll get quite a lot of potential pushback just because there's such dramatic changes. And I think that those alone will result in people making the right decisions about how to staff. So I agree entirely with you, Andrew. And I think that those things are really important. And by the way, as far as structural changes, onto your point before, Andy, about how easy it is to use AI, as you know, that it's not a big step to get in it. It's not like you have to build an airplane. That's very true, except not so true at DoD, because they don't always have the foundation and structure technically for just someone to give a credit card and start using a model and grabbing some data. So I think we try in this area to really structurally change things, not being prescriptive, not telling them specifically what to use or how to use it, but to break down old silos, which I think have been some of the biggest barriers to moving quickly that many of our adversaries don't have. Even the public-private silo, many of our adversaries don't necessarily have that one either.
And Safra, I'm glad you said something, based on, the two words stick out at me. Both you mentioned structure, the structural, challenges, as well as the cultural challenges. And both of those need to be harmonized I guess, molded or remolded, quickly in order to be, limber enough for the type of change that we need.
Okay, I think with that, we've got to move to the next chapter.
Thank you, Safra, and thanks to everybody else. I think you have all raised one issue about empowering people with the right skills and right capabilities, and I think this was one of the topics that will come up in many of the chapters. I think the next chapter also talks about how we empower co-coms, and then chapter 6 really talks about the talent. Before we move on to the next chapter, I just wanted to read one comment we got on YouTube, and this is coming from Andrew Comendo, the Kessel Run's Chief Technology Officer, who says, "We in DoD can only do as much as from the inside. We need Congress to make real changes in law for hiring, salary, acquisition, and data API mandates. How do we make progress with lawmakers?" So, Andrew, just to not to ignore your comment, but we have worked really hard with HASC and SASC in the previous NDAA. We're going to continue working with them. There's a lot of willingness to help you and help DoD get this right. So we will keep engaging. And I think our final report really aims to contribute towards easing all those obstacles you have just highlighted. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob Work to lead us through chapter 3 and Kumo on the staff.
Thanks, Illy. And thanks, Safra. The next two chapters reflect our strong sentiment on how DoD and our warfighters have to position themselves to harness the incredible power and promise of AI-enabled technology, both on and off the battlefield, from the back office to the foxhole, to compete, deter, and if necessary, fight and win in future conflicts. It's going to require a wholesale adjustment to operational concepts, technologies, organizational structures, and how we integrate allies and partners. That was the key theme of the 2018 National Defense Strategy, which still guides the Department of Defense. We believe that by 2025, DoD and our warfighters must be enabled with baseline digital literacy, access to the digital infrastructure and software required for just an ubiquitous AI integration and training, exercises, and operations. We call this being AI ready. Additionally, AI-enabled warfare will not hinge on a single new weapon technology or operational concept. It's going to center on the application and integration of AI-enabled technologies in every asset and facet of warfighting. In Chapter 3, we focus the lens on the application of AI in warfighting. Regardless of how one chooses to describe this new paradigm, algorithmic warfare, mosaic warfare, or as the Chinese say, intelligentized warfare, the commissioners agree that advantage in this new era of conflict will be driven by those who can best master AI-enabled capabilities across the full spectrum of military affairs. We describe these areas of AI masteries in 4 broad categories. 1, prepare. 2, sense and understand. 3, decide. And 4, act. Now, many of you will recognize the strong link to John Boyd's well-accepted OODA loop theory, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. We also highlight the value of AI in the preparatory stages of warfare, which captures use cases of AI in business processes, force design, and warfighter readiness. Now, to achieve mastery in these areas, the Commission makes 7 recommendations. First, you have to drive organizational reform through top-down leadership. I think it's safe to say that the last couple of years, as the department has been struggling to figure out the best organizational approach to AI transformation, they have adopted what I will call, what many people refer to as a let 1,000 flowers bloom approach. You have to have this this bottom up transformation push, but you really also need top-down leadership driving and accelerating the necessary reforms that Safra referred to in the department to make fast adoption of AI possible. A second, DoD will need to design warfighting concepts to inform the development of AI capabilities. Concepts provide warfighter-informed blueprints for doctrine, tactics, and capability. And in this modern digital area, the speed and iterative nature of tech development requires that these concepts be informed by a much tighter coupling of warfighters and technologists. Third, by the end of 2021, this year, we believe the Department of Defense should establish AI readiness performance goals to define what AI ready actually means for the department. And this is going to help prioritize near-term integration of AI into current systems. And it will also act as a means for us to assess warfighter AI readiness across all of the services. Fourth, DoD must drive towards ensuring cultural change and set the conditions to continuously out-innovate our competitors, who, as Eric Schmidt said at the top of the hour, they are really getting after this, and they're going after applications especially hard. We need to continue to out-innovate them and out-compete them. The military services should inculcate a culture of experimentation, innovation, and risk-taking in operational units to support this rapid integration of AI-enabled applications that we see as so central to the department's future. Fifth, the DoD should define a joint warfighting network architecture by the end of 2021. This secure open standards network will support the integration, deployment, and scaling of AI applications at the operational level and across all operating domains: space, air, sea, undersea, ground, etc. Six, DoD must continue to invest in priority AI research and development R&D areas that could support future military capabilities. The Commission highlights R&D areas where the DoD must continue to invest that supports AI for warfighting applications. Finally, the Department of State and Defense must promote AI interoperability in the adoption of critical emerging technologies among our key allies and partners. Collectively, these recommendations, alongside the reforms outlined in Chapter 2, are intended to drive a comprehensive shift in the Department of Defense towards an AI-enabled future. Before moving on, I'll pause here for any comments from my fellow commissioners. Illy, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Open for conversation, Chapter 3. This is really DoD specifically focused. Comments, feedback, anything we need to adjust?
I'll just comment on the 7th one. I think this conversation of interoperability and coalition, our key allies and partners, is a theme that is throughout this document, but couldn't be overemphasized here. To create a standard before others reach the table, particularly those that don't share our values, I think is very critical in this particular domain.
Particularly with, Bob brought out the importance of, the OODA loop. You've learned over the hard way with coalition forces and multiple wars, our inability to share information. And now we're talking about sharing information at machine speeds, and the AIs have to talk to each other. And while we clearly don't want to slow down our development and having to spend years in standards bodies, you need to solve the interoperability and sharing capabilities between us and our allies.
Bob, this is Jason. A quick question. What are the best convening mechanisms that we have or existing organizations across the US and NATO for ensuring interoperability? I mean, you've seen this across multiple platforms. For AI, what are going to be the key organizations and mechanisms to ensure interoperability?
Well, we actually talk about that in our section on developing interoperability and developing our allies. And, our initial thinking is to start with the 5 Eyes and then start to grow from there. And so perhaps have a measure where the 5 Eyes are talking about interoperability and AI and how we use AI together. And then we start adding partners and allies until we have a center of mass. I mean, a very good mass to do this. Now, there's a arms directorate in NATO, for example, that meets quite often. There's Allied Command Transformation down in Norfolk, which talks about different types of concepts. That would be a wonderful place for us to start talking about concepts and potential combined doctrine. I don't think we made a specific recommendation, Jason, and this might be, Illy, something that we could ask the staff to think about and say, should we make any specific recommendations on existing bodies where we could actually start to do this? But it's a great question, Jason.
No, I would
Thanks,
like
Bob.
to,
Great answer.
I'd like to add to that, just from the background of acquisition, it would be useful if we had industry stand forward in this area as well. We have a global world as far as industry in terms of AI. It would be important that we have them come to the table as part of this discourse, particularly in like-minded nations, so that we have some form of a universal standard to which we all agree in terms of that interoperability and the application science.
I'll also mention that in the interim reports coming out of the work on responsible and AI and ethics, there's been recommendations and discussions about the need to coordinate with allies in terms of the key considerations we call out: robustness, testing and validation, documentation, privacy, data sources, and so on. And those kinds of key issues are of deep interest to the European community and the Five Eyes, I should say. And I think that we want to make sure we include those kinds of things, those considerations in the deliberation and coordination with other nations.
I wanted to respond to Commissioner McFarlane's excellent comments. the use of industry to help with this stuff. And when you look at the OODA loop, the OO part and the A part, I really do believe that industry is going to be able to help. There is a really growing set of data models across different parts of logistics, materials, energy supply chains, which I feel very comfortable about, meaning that we can communicate well, including on the perception parts. The D part, the decision-making part, is where we and our allies have got work ahead of us, because as you've seen, the crux of a lot of the complex parts of an AI strategy are the need for humans in the loop, experts and generals to take responsibility for decisions being made by these AI systems. That, I think, is where I'm certainly hoping that both the research community and folks who are building alliances with other countries can get together so that we've got clarity on how we mix together decision procedures in military operations.
Right, heard all the good feedback. Just, the allies and partners piece is sprinkled a little bit on this chapter. We have it also in other chapters, but then we have a standalone chapter on really what to do with allies and partners, which we will discuss tomorrow. And with that, any last comments, feedback on this before we move on to chapter 4? Hearing none, we got your feedback. We will update this chapter based on your comments and come back to you in February. And then I would like to ask Bob Ward to do a quick presentation on chapter 4. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Illy. There's been a lot of discussion about the risks associated with AI-enabled weapons and autonomous systems. And the Commission has taken these discussions very seriously and have discussed them quite a lot. So this chapter really talks about autonomous weapon systems and the risks associated with AI-enabled warfare and what the Commission thinks about it. The increasing use of AI technologies and weapon systems has generated important questions. And generally these questions ask, are the systems lawful under international humanitarian law or the laws of war? Are they safe to employ in combat? And are they ethical? And the ethical concerns go beyond lawful. The lawful concerns, do they reflect our values? World military powers, both large and small, are pursuing AI-enabled systems which have the potential to improve decision-making and enable levels of performance, speed, and discrimination that exceed human capabilities. However, there is significant international debate over whether such systems can comply with international humanitarian law and how to both minimize the risk of unintended military engagements, meaning non-combatants or restricted entities like mosques or something like that, and avoid inadvertent and uncontrolled conflict escalation, which is a major point. In fact, we already have a question from someone on this that I'll address at the end of the discussion. The Commission met extensively with civil society groups, academia, and government agencies to study this issue, and it offers the following 4 judgments related to AI-enabled and autonomous weapon systems. Number 1, provided their use is authorized by a human commander and operator, properly designed and tested AI-enabled and autonomous weapon system have already been, and we believe continue to and can continue to be used in ways that are consistent with law and our ethical values and will be safe in combat. Number 2, existing DoD procedures are capable of ensuring that the United States will field safe and reliable AI-enabled autonomous weapon systems and use them in a manner that is consistent with international humanitarian law. It's informed by DoD's comprehensive testing, evaluation, validation, and verification procedures, and the fact that they are trying to improve them for autonomous weapon systems. It's rigorous procedures to ensure targeting decisions comply with IHL. I think everyone knows that staff judge advocates are embedded at every level in a combatant command so that decisions over the use of force are always validated as being lawful. And its adoption of ethical principles for AI and its longstanding commitment to IHL compliance. Third, this is what worries us. We are very confident in the extensive procedures that the United States has in place to make sure that these type of systems would be lawful, safe, and ethical. But we can find little evidence that US competitors have equivalent rigorous procedures to ensure that their AI-enabled and autonomous weapon systems will be responsibly designed and lawfully used. Fourth, and importantly, the Commission does not support a global prohibition of AI-enabled and autonomous weapon systems. A ban faces challenges associated with defining such systems, verifying compliance, and there's low trust among the major military powers. These judgments don't obviate countries' obligations to take steps to reduce the risks associated with these systems, and such efforts should and must be led, we believe, by the United States. We've made several recommendations to mitigate such risks, and these recommendations can be split into three kinds of pots. Actions the United States can take by itself, actions the United States can and should take with its allies, and actions that the United States can and should take with its strategic competitors, provided they are willing to do so. Acting by itself, the United States should clearly and publicly affirm existing US policy that only human beings can authorize the employment of nuclear weapons, and seek similar commitments, public commitments, from Russia and China. Doing so, we believe, would have a stabilizing effect, reduce the risk of AI fuel strategic escalation, and demonstrate a practical US commitment to the responsible deployment of AI in weapon systems. Additionally, the United States should pursue research and technical means to verify both compliance with AI-related arms control agreements and to prevent proliferation of AI-enabled and autonomous weapon systems. Technical breakthroughs are going to be needed to enable any potential future agreements to limit or combat proliferation of these technologies and weapons. Acting with allies, we believe the United States should develop international standards of practice for the development, testing, and use of AI-enabled and autonomous weapon systems. Obtaining allied consensus regarding these types of standards will set important norms in place, promote the safe use and development of such systems, and further highlight the commitment of the United States and its allies to ethical and responsible uses of AI in warfare. Finally, acting with competitors, the United States should discuss AI's impact on crisis stability within the existing US-Russian strategic security dialogue, and we believe we should create a similar dialogue with China. Other dialogues are needed to increase mutual understanding regarding the behavior of our autonomous systems and reduce the risk of inadvertent escalation, which is an issue we've really talked a lot about. This dialogue should lay the seeds for future concrete confidence building measures in this space. Now, Michael Clare has submitted a question, and Michael is with the Arms Control Association, and he asked the following: what measures do you recommend to prevent the unintended or accidental outbreak of nuclear war arising from increased reliance on AI-enabled computer-assisted battlefield decision-making? I've actually answered this question, but I want to pull out the main talking points. First and foremost, we believe the United States should clearly and publicly affirm that only human beings, not AI or autonomous systems, can authorize employment of nuclear weapons. And it should seek similar commitments from all nuclear armed states, including Russia and China. We believe the United States must establish a channel with Russia and China to discuss the impact of AI-enabled systems on crisis stability. We haven't come to a consensus, but generally, we should be very careful and with the use of autonomous systems in any type of a combat system that might be able to order retaliatory strike. We must be very, very careful and understand exactly how our competitors are dealing with this issue. Also discuss the impact of such systems within the existing U.S.-Russia strategic security dialogue, and we think we should create a U.S.-China strategic security dialogue. Finally, we believe that we should establish clear international standards of practice for the development, testing, and use of AI-enabled and autonomous weapon systems to ensure that all states field responsible and safe AI military systems. So thanks for the question, Michael. I hope I've answered it. Illy, over to you for discussion.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for bringing this issue from day one to our attention. I know a lot of commissioners were interested. You had a lot of conversation, and I think the chapter really represents, in my view, your feedback and your guidance. But I'm opening it up to everybody to see if we missed something. Is there any criticism? Any other thoughts you might want to add to this chapter?
Well, let me just add to Bob by saying that we know how important these issues are, and how much discussion there's been among multiple sectors, including UN meetings. And so we hope that interested folks will dive into the details of the language and the discussion in this chapter, and provide feedback over time, either to commissioners or staff or to the whole commission. Just to reiterate, there's great concern about the risk of unintended escalations and crisis management and escalation when it comes to these systems. And unintended escalations may occur for many reasons. Even when systems individually have been tested, typically in the vacuum of an engineering team, extensively, there are going to be challenging and untested interpretations of signals by people in AI systems in the open world. And that there will be complexities of interaction among AI-enabled systems, as well as people in traditional systems during times of stress. And pressures will likely tilt designs towards systems that react more quickly, and then tend to lead to shorter periods of time for effective human oversight on engagement decisions. And so I think the caveats pointed out in recommendations are important ones, as well as the need to work with allies and rivals through existing and new programs and mechanisms. Bob, we point out in the report about the US-Russia strategic security dialogue, but we also point out there's nothing like this with China. And there's been some resistance over time, even though the United States has pushed for some kind of a dialogue when it comes to concerns and working together. So I'll stop there.
I think it's important that we need to invest and think about new ways of doing tests and validation and evaluation. When we use AI, particularly across multiple systems on a network basis, we need to actually test for that. Testing individual systems is no longer going to be good enough when systems are talking to each other and reacting to one another. So I think this is one of the areas that, I know all the commissioners have been thinking through this, but we can emphasize even more in these chapters. to put that level of investment in. You know, autonomous systems have been in our, you know, capabilities and our adversary capabilities. They may not be powered by AI. They might be powered by old rules-based systems. We are familiar with them, but as these become much more networkable and react to one another, we need to test and validate those models.
You know, can I add that the term I use for this is emergent behavior, and because these systems have some amount of error in them, when they're combined, you can get emergent behavior that you don't expect. And so it's more than a simple test. You actually have to constantly be testing them, constantly be training against them, constantly be trying to make sure that they don't go off the deep end when they combine in ways that people did not anticipate.
Speaking of that, Eric, there's also emergence over time of new capabilities and use cases. We had a bunch of discussion, and it appears in our report that we want to stay on this and not say, you know, this is done, but watch the terrain over time, have the right offices in place for reflecting about new developments in this space. We've talked about pursuing technical means, for example, which is a research area, as well as a socio-technical area, pursuing technical means to verify compliance with future arms control agreements, and even what that means when it comes to the use of development and use of these weapons by nation, state, and non-state actors over time. So I think we have to really recommend that we stay on this.
I think this is an excellent dialogue, because I think one of the challenges we have as Eric's talking about, is the ability to be transparent. And it's particularly disturbing with other nations do not vote to come onto this island to work with us to find ways of doing this within that value system. And I think that we should be very, very aware that that implies a lot of challenges in our future to be able to protect and defend and to understand and to be able to apply. I think that ought to sponsor us to think of ways that we could create that transparency regardless of who signs up to an agreement to do so.
There's that question regarding landmines as an autonomous systems, and what kind of precedents does landmines have, and as we think through these autonomous systems. I think one of the things that we are all aware of is the importance of eliminating indiscriminate autonomous weapons. That's just generally, you know, a place where it's much harder to reduce down the risk. We should add intelligence to add precision and make sure that we don't have casualties that are unforeseen, and it is in the intent of the user to deal with the targets that that individual user or commander has. So, you know, it is our hope that AI and ML will actually reduce down the horrors of warfare, but we got a lot of work to do.
Thanks, and I'll just add that a couple of comments and questions were addressed already. So a good friend of us, Jonathan Rodriguez, made a comment that this section is excellent and extremely important. It will help save millions of lives. And I think Jeff Oldham, who's also a big friend of NSCAI and has helped us on many of the chapters, I think he has a comment question that I believe Dr. Horowitz just answered, which is regarding the recommendation to fund technical means to verify compliance with the future AR arms control agreements. What technical verification measures do you envision? I think Dr. Horowitz.
May I add a comment to that?
Yes, of course, Andrew.
Yep. So we're seeing a trend in practice of artificial intelligence, and it's actually in many industries where there's safety critical or things which could have a danger of bias, a move away from big black box neural networks into proper sort of scientifically understood model-based statistical models for making decisions. One of the things that this commission is hoping comes out of this and the chapter on ethics is a move towards, you're not going to build a system which just takes everything, merges it into a big black box reinforcement learning model and comes up with a solution where it just decides. Instead, if there is a false alarm, like one state shoots down something, which was a mistake. Then when the president of one state then calls the other, what the hell just happened? I want the answer to be, we got a false positive in this particular subsystem which identified this threat, not, well, our big black box decided to do something and we don't know what happened.
And then just lastly, before we move on, we had a question for Peter McKinnon that I think, Gilman, you addressed on landmines. But if not, please chime in.
Ilya, I would like to reinforce what Gilman said here. And he's exactly right. Landmines were banned because they were indiscriminate. And they also had essentially an unlimited mission duration. You know, they could hang around for months or years and still operate. You know, the biggest contributor to inadvertent engagements is target misidentification. The Center for Naval Analysis did a study of, I think it was almost 1,000 engagements Afghanistan, and 50% of the causes, 50% of hitting a non-combatant or a restricted entity was caused by target misidentification. And in every case, they were done by humans. Humans make mistakes all the time in battle. And the hypothesis is, to be proven, that artificial intelligence will improve target identification, which will make sure, or which should improve and reduce the number of collateral damage, reduce the number of fratricide. So it is a moral imperative to at least pursue this hypothesis, because the autonomous systems will not be indiscriminate unless we design them that way. And the United States and the United Nations have essentially said indiscriminate weapons are not consistent with international humanitarian law. So I think Gilman hit the nail on the head. This is going to be, we have to test these systems. We have to understand their limitations. We can only use them in situations where the artificial intelligence is not so brittle that it is most likely to malfunction. But there is a lot of reason to believe that artificial intelligence will improve and decrease inadvertent engagements.
Yeah, I mean, one could imagine, Bob, someday, I guess you said the jury's out, but it's a direction with some moral imperative, a clear moral imperative, that one day the standards of expectations and standards of practice when it comes to IHL, law of war, will change such that methods considered consistent today will be considered inconsistent in the future, given the rise of more precise methods and methods that will limit civilian death and damage to infrastructure. Same with false positives, false negatives. The idea that someday there might be discussion about, in IHL dialogue, about what's tolerable when it comes to the characteristics of these weapons and what's considered immoral.
I think Andrew's point also of, look, we can't build these systems as black boxes. They need governance. You would never give a young officer the command to just take all the data and go off and decide what you think is right. So we're not going to let a human do that. Why would you let a machine do that? So, I think we've got to be very thoughtful, and we should hold all nations to that same standards, right? I mean, even our adversaries and our competitors, it's to everybody's interest not to design systems that go rogue.
Speaking of that, one last comment, which we haven't discussed very much in our open discussion, but it's in our report. The notion that for any automated action, there always needs to be a human being accountable for what that system does. And we make that very clear and point that out as these are human accountable decisions that these systems make. Humans need to be accountable for the behavior as well as the uncertainties in what these systems will do.
Thank you so much of everybody in online comments for this important chapter. I would like to thank Bob Work. We will take the conversation, refine this chapter, and come back to you again in February. In the interest of time, I would like us to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 5, and it's focused on national intelligence. So I'll turn it over to Jason Matheny to lead the conversation. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Illy. The chapter 5 team includes myself, Safra, Andy, Bob, Katrina, Ken, and Steve, and our extraordinarily capable staff of Mike Jackson, David Kumashiro, Christopher Rice, and Courtney Barno. Thanks to all of them for the hundreds, literally hundreds of hours that they spent synthesizing classified and unclassified materials, the many discussions that we've had over the past several months. During COVID, the last place one wants to be spending lots of time is in a small skiff. So extra gratitude for everyone's work on this chapter. Our recommendations focus on strengthening national intelligence through the adoption of AI-enabled technologies. And this is a topic of special interest to many of us who came from the intelligence community or depended on the intelligence community to detect and anticipate threats before they became crises. Collectively, our group believes that national intelligence will benefit from the adoption of AI perhaps more than any other national security mission. And I think we're willing to get into a wrestling match over that just because of the potential here on so many key areas within intelligence where AI offers promise. First, AI-enabled capabilities are likely to improve every stage of the intelligence cycle from planning, targeting, collection, processing, to analysis and dissemination. AI tools can make satellite imagery, communication signals, economic indicators, scientific literature, and other publicly available data more intelligible. AI can find correlations among open source data and other sources of intelligence to help the IC be more precise, be more efficient, and more effective in its targeting and collection, all while also being able to protect privacy in new ways that aren't possible given our existing tools. Some intelligence agencies have made great strides in adopting AI, but there are, in general, a broad range of barriers from realizing the potential of AI due to different authorities, different policies, budget constraints, data sharing rules, and technical standards that are legacy. Most of them date back decades before we had the digital environments that we operate in today. Of particular note are the obstacles that are presented by the security clearance process. And it was a recurring theme in our work for this chapter that the current clearance process is one of the most significant obstacles to hiring and retaining technical talent. And really none of our recommendations in this chapter would be effective without substantial reforms of the process. In my last job, we lost a lot of talented scientists and engineers who were willing to take a 50% pay cut from their industry job, either working for Andrew or Eric, in order to work on critical intelligence missions. But they weren't willing to wait a year or longer for the security clearance process needed to even start work. And it's hard to blame them. So we really need to fix this process. It's critical. In the first section of this chapter, we set an agenda for the intelligence community to be AI ready by 2025. And by AI ready, we mean that intelligence officers are enabled with baseline digital literacy and access to the tools and infrastructure that they need for AI integration in each stage of the intelligence cycle. Starting immediately, the IC needs to prioritize integrating AI in the intelligence cycle at every stage. Products should be disseminated at machine speed, which means they must be in machine readable formats. Our data need to be machine readable, and systems across the IC need to be able to ingest and use those data without manual intervention. Future intelligence systems that we're planning, both for collection and analysis, need to be optimized for AI. And in order to achieve this, we make 6 concrete recommendations. The first is that we need to change the risk management practices within our IT infrastructure in order to accelerate new technology adoption, including reciprocal certification and accreditation of software across the 17 IC agencies, which today doesn't happen as seamlessly as it should, and also adopting more flexible software acquisition policies, such as those that were proposed by the Defense Innovation Board. Second, we need to empower the IC's science and technology leadership by designating the ODNI's Director of Science and Technology as the IC's Chief Technology Officer, with responsibilities that are commensurate, including coordinating the IC's AIM initiative and other modernization efforts. We need to improve coordination and interoperability between the IC's and DoD's systems to ensure that they're built to common standards and are tested in common test beds. We have almost as much of a challenge in coordinating this internally within the US government as we do with our allies. So we need to get this right. We need to ensure that, that our tools are going to work across agencies when we need them. We should capitalize on AI-enabled analysis of open source and publicly available information, where we think there could be some of the greatest near-term returns on investment, particularly given some of the commercial analytic tools that already exist. We should prioritize and accelerate collection of scientific and technical intelligence in order to better understand our competitors' capabilities and intentions. And this is a topic that I've seen the importance of firsthand. We're often not as knowledgeable as we wish about what our competitors are investing, how strong their capabilities are, and what they intend to do with them. And after reviewing the total number of collectors that are currently assigned to collection on competitors' technology programs, especially dual-use technologies like AI, we came away deeply concerned that the numbers are far too small and leave us vulnerable to a broad range of technological surprise. Last for this section, and as I previewed at the start when I was on my soapbox, we should aggressively pursue security clearance reform for clearances at the top secret level and above. We should enforce security clearance reciprocity among members of the IC, which has been an ambition that we haven't fully realized. And we should identify more opportunities for scientists and engineers to meaningfully contribute to national intelligence missions, but with lower security clearances. Often our research and development components have projects that are not classified at the top secret level. Instead of having a one-size-fits-all approach, let's right-size the security clearance to the project at hand. In the second section of this chapter, we describe the goal of AI-enabled intelligence by 2030. By 2030, we believe that the IC should rely on a continuous pipeline of all-domain, all-source intelligence analysis that's processed through a federated architecture. Such a system should bring greater clarity to events in the world and enable more accurate real-time and continuously updated forecasts of emerging threats. That is, decision makers should be able to access a real-time dashboard of threats in the world with real-time forecasts. To achieve this, we recommend first that we continue to build out a purpose-built IT environment that can fuse intelligence from different domains and sources. The IC has made some progress towards this goal with its adoption of cloud computing and a shared IT environment. Those are important first steps, but we need to make it much easier to share data across agencies, to share analytic tools, to share testing environments, so that we can understand where our tools succeed and where they break. We should also embrace all-source predictive analysis as a high priority goal. There are really only a few truly predictive analytic tools that are operated in the IC, despite it being one of the primary responsibilities of the IC to provide warning. So the use of forecasting tournaments and prize challenges by the IC can continue to advance breakthroughs in predictive analytics, and we should be using them much more frequently. Last, we should develop innovative approaches to human-machine teaming in intelligence collection and analysis. We're still learning how to team humans and machines so that we can leverage the unique abilities of both. So we need more work on this topic of the sort that we thought was exemplified in IARPA's hybrid forecasting work that recently concluded. And with that, I'll now open the floor to other commissioners and staff for a discussion of this chapter.
So Jason, doesn't 2030 seem way too late for you?
Yes, it does. I think we would have wanted to put everything in the 2025 bin. And I think one of the things that makes us anxious is just that we haven't seen the rate of progress in the last 4 years that would make an accurate prediction of what we'll achieve by 2025. But that's probably the wrong attitude to come in with. We don't want that to be a self-fulfilling prophecy of pessimism. All of the things that I described in the 2030 bucket, we should be aspiring to get done faster because we need them today.
Just a hammer on this. It just seems like national intelligence is the first use of AI because of its ability to do both recognition, pattern matching, vision recognition, and so forth. And that's what I think the IC spends most of its time on. So it seems to me that we should take a very strong position that there should be common standards, common tools across all of the IC groups at the top secret level, that they should move to the cloud as fast as they can, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We should take a very strong position that this is an easy win from the standpoint of national security if it's done correctly.
I agree, Eric. I would be all for taking everything in our 2030 bucket and adding it to our 2025 bucket.
I wouldn't argue time. I totally agree with time. But I would offer that we have a problem with skills and we have a problem with adoption. And I think those are things that I would like, if we're going to move it up to be an earlier, that we have a discussion in our implementation plan. How would we be able to bring that talent to the IC that is qualified, that can do that work? Because I think, I don't want to be inspirational. I certainly like to be aspirational, but I also want to be pragmatic. We need to find a way to give the tools to the people that we call out, because an impossibility also is a turnoff to people.
I would say,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say on the IC, look, we have an amazing cadre of IC officers who work their jobs every single day. And when they want to, they can move mountains. When they wanted to change the analytical framework back in the early 2000s and modernize the systems, they were able to do it. When they wanted to go to the cloud, they were able to do it. We need to tell them that they need to do it again. And I think the workforce is looking for that signal. They're not looking for the easy way out. We are competing in the world where our adversaries and competitors are filling our coffers with lots of disinformation. We need those advanced systems, and 2025 is a reasonable time frame to get it done.
I would just add a couple things. First of all, I think I completely agree that we can be going faster in the IC, and I like setting a more aggressive goal to 2025. I will say that I think that they've made quite a bit of progress in the IC and are meaningfully ahead of the DoD in terms of both adopting the cloud as well as AI in their everyday activities. And so I think there's been progress. I think it can go faster. I think I would add one other thing, which is something that was said by Jason in his overview, which is I do think, watching the way that the different agencies use technology, there's often a lot of duplication in asking for the same types of pieces of technology and regions and classified capabilities, top secret capabilities, where I don't think there has to be. And if you look at the private sector, what often happens is when you have a lot of different organizations that are duplicating functionality and wasting, frankly, some of the money and resources that go towards other things, you need somebody who helps pull those organizations together and say, you have to prove why you need something different for the same basic set of requirements. I think the same could be applied here, where you have, multiple parts of our federal government building top secret and secret different infrastructure regions and capabilities where they really could be combining forces and being more efficient and saving resource to apply elsewhere.
I want to return to the timetable question and argue, or well, at least represent the other side for a more balanced view on this. So, I mean, I understand the desire to do everything as quickly as possible, but I think that we have to be cognizant of the cultural change and the way of looking at things that's completely different. I think a lot of the enthusiasm is thinking about just the data, massive amounts of data and the data analysis and the data interpretation side. And that's not the only job of the IC. I think the full power of the AI is not just in the data analysis, but also in the decision-making, the response, the human on the loop instead of human in the loop. And it really requires an embracing of a completely different way of thinking. And I think that we have to understand that changing the entire thought patterns and also getting familiar with all of the process and workflow changes that come as a result of that is the change that is needed, and not just everybody doing the same job with a different set of tools. And so I just want to emphasize that I'm not against the changes in the timetable, but we need to understand this is a different way of thinking, a different way of doing business, not just swapping out tools.
To add to what we just heard, in that it's good to see develop innovative human-centric approaches to human-machine teaming as a recommendation in Chapter 5. The question is how to pull that off. It really is going to take folks that have a detailed understanding of status quo and task and critical needs of the task and current challenges, as well as developments when it comes to the human-AI collaboration and teaming efforts. It's going to take a lot of innovation, but also understanding and background. So getting people from both sides, the core research in this front, which is growing, and the actual specific needs of intelligence and taking it from where it is today to where it can be better, both modestly, like it'd be great to have a system that would help me do this tedious task better versus more deeply. Here's a whole new approach to how humans work with large data feeds and streams. So I just, a concern rises, especially with the wall of clearance, as to whether we'll get the kind of collaboration we need, given the fact that, or the likelihood that organic, looking at research papers in the open space and then looking at the cleared techniques might not work as well as it would in other areas.
I think Steve's point is a real one, and we shouldn't take it lightly. I think same thing, the points you bring up, Eric. If we want to start cultural change within the IC, we need to integrate people who understands how do you deal with this class of technology, and not just from a technology point of view. That means that the senior leadership within the IC, not just the S&T folks, not just the digital folks, need to think about how to recraft tradecraft, both on the collection side, the analytical side, and then on the dissemination side, to have AI and ML as a part of that complete chain, and not just say, well, that's the S&T's problem or that's the digital guy's problem, right? Until we do that, we're not going to move the ball forward. We can have all the tools in place, and by 2025, where culturally we're not going to change the place unless we tackle the senior leadership issues as well.
Gilman, you're doing exactly what I was not so articulate in saying. It is, to me, absolutely not a technology space problem. It is the adoption and adaption problem. And I think this starts to get into an implementation plan. So I think in order for us to talk about it, we ought to think about getting together and seeing what we can do to foster that implementation quicker. What are the things that we could bring to the table to help that cultural change, to change an organization? Those things that we could do inside of the implementation team. I think aspirationally, I just was thinking, it isn't really an aspirational and it isn't really an inspirational, it's an absolute emergency problem. So we should be getting to doing this quicker. And let's think of what we can do to help that and facilitate that through the implementation plan.
Well, and I would say that some of those topics have been brought up both in the DoD and the IC context. So to me, the two tools that are most important as one is constant rotation and cross-fertilization from the people who understand the mission to the people who understand the technology. And the second is constant experimentation. And we need to be uniformly lowering the barriers on both of those processes occurring and making sure that those become commonplace and not the exception, and in a continuous fashion. You know, the contact needs to be happening on a daily, weekly basis, not on a, you know, every 6 months, some technology people parachute in and tell everybody else what to do.
So I'm going to step in, and since this is a public meeting, just take a couple of questions from the audience. Jason, a question from Cindy M via YouTube. Are you concerned that analysts will become biased or overly dependent on AI-enabled intelligence, particularly around the forecasting function that was mentioned? There's another question from Peter McKinnon about quantum, but Peter, if you don't mind, I'll keep this question for tomorrow since we have a chapter tomorrow afternoon that talks about quantum. And then lastly, comment from Dean Salaces, SGE here with us, but also a really good friend of the commission. Do we need to go further in recommending structural changes to the IC to empower the DNI with authorities commensurate with the responsibilities across the IC? Jason, all easy questions for you. and good.
Well, great. Thanks, Cindy, for the great question. There's a research literature on automation bias, which is the bias that people sometimes have in having excessive trust in automated decision-making tools. There are some interesting, though, counterexamples where people have insufficient trust in decision-making tools, including we found in the intelligence community where this has been studied, where automated tools are often mistrusted because of their opacity. You know, when an Intel analyst is asked to explain the result of a judgment, it's not going to be just sufficient to say, well, this 300-layer neural net says there's a risk. So this is one of the reasons why the intelligence community has been very interested in methods that are more transparent and interpretable than traditional machine learning models. But I agree with you. We need to make sure that that analysts aren't placing excessive trust in models. And to a recommendation that I think Eric Horvitz has made separately, we sort of need scorecards to go along with models that carry them so that we understand what their performance levels are on a variety of different tasks. We have a better sense of where they're likely to fail. And we do need to spend more time building transparency and interpretability into models so that we can understand what's happening beneath them. To Dean's great question about DNI authorities, Dean will be able to answer this question better than I will, given that he was one of the senior leaders in the intelligence community thinking about technology transformation. But I do think the elevation of a CTO within the Director of National Intelligence office that really is responsible for coordinating the modernization of IT technology across the IC is needed. And I do think we need to be able to make a coherent budget request that represents all of the IC's collective needs to Congress in order to enable that. As Dean knows better than I do, getting 17 agencies to act in unison is very challenging. So as a first step, we need to create this new role with the appropriate authorities within DNI. Other commissioners have any thoughts on these questions?
Jason, I would love to have a member of the DO or a member of the DI actually be somebody who understands technology. We've had them in the past. And if we're going to want to make progress going, first it needs to be individuals who are good at both skills. And they're hard to find, but they're out there. Minimally, we should be developing it over the next generation of IC leaders.
Thanks.
Hey, this, Bob, I know we're a little bit over time, but I want to try to tie what we've been discussing about the intelligence community with the earlier discussion on the OODA loop. You know, a lot of people believe that the OODA loop is a closed one-way cycle of seeing, deciding, and doing. And therefore they believe the D, the decision, is the most important process. And much of the discussion on AI-enabled systems go towards decision-making tools. But Boyd saw the OODA loop as much, much different. You know, he described it as a competitive cross-referencing process of projection, correlation, and rejection. And he said, orientation is the most important step. It shapes how the commander interprets the observations that are coming in. It shapes the decision, which then shapes the action, and is in turn shaped by the feedback that's happening all the time. And so, you know, he said the whole goal of the OODA loop, using tempo, what he called transient maneuvers, slowing down, speeding up, was to make the adversary's perceived reality diverge from actual reality. And it is becoming more and more difficult to understand what actual reality is. And this, in my view, is where the AI tools can really help. They're not going to be right all the time, but I guarantee you that they're going to be right more often than humans who are trying to understand just an avalanche and tsunami of data. So I agree with the folks that say, look, time is of the essence. We have to get a cultural shift to say, look, what is the intelligence community really pursuing AI for? To drive a commander's decision, or to actually make sure that the commander's perceived reality equals actual reality? Because if that gets wrong, as Boyd says, the bad guy collapses. So I don't know if I've made myself clear here, but you know, I agree with Jason's upfront part that the IC community is the place where AI can probably help the most right now. And doing it fast, I think, is really important. Over.
Thank you, Bob. Amen.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the commissioners for the discussion. Over to you, Ellie.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'd like us to move on to Chapter 7. As Angela mentioned, we're going to skip Chapter 6 because Dr. Griffiths couldn't make it to the meeting today. So we're going to shift Chapter 6 to tomorrow. So we're going to now move on to Chapter 7, and I'll pass it over to Dr. Horvitz.
Thanks, Illy. I've been chairing the line of effort that's been focused on ethics and responsible AI. It's been a pleasure to collaborate with fellow commissioners on this line of effort. Jose Marie Griffiths, Jason Matheny, Mignon Clyburn, Katrina McFarland, and a truly impressive top-notch staff: Jessica Young, Rama Eluru, Carolyn Denui, Chuck Howell, Lance Lantier, and Jade Tarwood. Our recommendations in Chapter 7 stem from this line of effort's work over the past year to help ensure that departments and agencies critical to national security are equipped to responsibly develop, acquire, and field AI tools. In Chapter 7, we note that this is a critical area to get right. And we say, quote, if AI systems routinely do not work as designed, or if an AI system is unpredictable in ways that can have significant negative consequences, then leaders will not adopt it, operators will not use it, Congress will not fund it, and the American people will not support it. So agency stakeholders who decide to use an AI system for a mission need an informed understanding of the opportunities and risks and trade-offs. They need an awareness of the capabilities and limitations of a system's performance. They need to even understand the value of deploying an AI system versus status quo, and to have justified confidence that the system will perform as intended. While there have been studies about the responsible development and fielding of AI technologies worldwide, and these are evolving like the technology itself, the policies and best practices coming to the fore can really start to guide decisions about the design, development, and use of AI systems. Now, in July, the Commission published a detailed framework to guide the responsible development and fielding of AI across national security applications and communities. It contains a set of key considerations for policymakers and technical practitioners covering the breadth of the AI lifecycle and practices that should be integrated and should be updated as the technology advances. These considerations include recommendations for implementing AI systems in accordance with American values and the rule of law, and recommendations in the categories of engineering practices, system performance, human AI interaction and teaming, and accountability and governance of the systems. Since publishing the key considerations, we've sought and received feedback from the public, from domestic and international members of the AI community, and from stakeholders within departments and agencies that are critical to national security. We had some wonderful sessions, and these included policymakers and practitioners from the DoD, the intelligence community, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Energy, State, Department of HHS, and larger AI communities of practice. And we've been grateful for the interest and the comments that we've received. The Commission is heartened that some departments have by now, even this quickly, already taken actions to integrate recommendations from the framework. We're grateful for the feedback from department and agency stakeholders who've been actually candid about the resources, investments, and the guidance that's still needed to implement the framework in a holistic manner. So while the framework covers dozens of practices that contribute toward an ideal state of the responsible development and fielding of AI systems, some practices are more critical than others, depending on the stakes and the context, and complying with them is going to require different costs and resources. So one high-level comment is it's important to strike the right balance in distinguishing the preferred outcomes and the must-have between the ideal and the absolute requirements. So in our final report, we highlight key actions from our framework that all departments and agencies critical to national security can and should take now as a priority. We also recommend investments and resources that the government should make available to further responsible AI efforts across all agencies. Now, our recommendations span 5 categories: robust and reliable AI, human AI interaction and teaming, testing and evaluation, verification and validation, leadership, and accountability and governance. For robust and reliable AI, we recommend that US government agencies focus more federal research and development investments on advancing AI security and robustness. And second, that the agencies consult interdisciplinary groups of experts to conduct risk assessments, improve their documentation practices, and build overall system architectures to limit the worst-case consequences of system failure. In the area of human AI interaction and teaming, we recommend that the government pursue a sustained multidisciplinary initiative through national security research labs focused on enhancing human AI teaming, and that agencies clarify their policies on human roles and functions, develop designs that optimize human-machine interaction, and provide ongoing and organization-wide AI training. For testing and evaluation, verification and validation, in addition to the increased R&D investments to improve our understanding of how to conduct AI and related software and systems testing, evaluation, verification, and validation, TEVV as we refer to it, the acronym, we recommend that DoD adopt a sweeping package of testing and evaluation processes, methods, and resources for AI systems, and that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, provides and regularly refreshes a set of standards, performance metrics, and tools for qualified confidence in AI models, data, and training environments, as well as predicted outcomes. On leadership, we recommend that the government appoint a full-time, senior-level responsible AI lead in each national security agency and in each branch of the armed services, and create a standing body of multidisciplinary experts in the new National AI Initiative Office. For accountability and governance, we recommend that agencies adapt and extend existing accountability policies to cover the full life cycle of AI systems and their components, and establish policies that allow individuals to raise concerns about irresponsible AI development and to institute comprehensive oversight and enforcement practices. So for all these recommendations, when it comes to implementation, the devil's going to be in the details. For each recommendation that passes according to commissioners' votes, we will discuss key actors who we recommend lead each action and important details for each recommendation to be effective. Let me turn it over now to Illy and discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Horowitz. I'll open it up to commissioners if they have any questions or comments or feedback.
I just have a quick note of gratitude. I was just deeply impressed, Eric, by your leadership on this chapter and by the staff's work. And I think these are some of the most ambitious and useful recommendations that I've seen in this category in any report. Over.
I'm sure the staff will appreciate that as well as the commissioners. Thank you.
Yeah, and Eric, I join the praise for the work. What is the update on the relationship of your recommendations and the AI ethics principles that the DIB proposed and that the Defense Department adopted a year ago? I assume that this is an expansion of those principles. Right?
Yeah, we actually were
and making them more partner focused.
Yeah, go ahead. No, we actually followed that work very closely, and we're close with the JAIC and with the DIB work that what became the DoD principles, but referred to them with fondness as high level and wonderful aspirations. And we've tried to take things to the next level. We found, whether it be corporate work or the DoD work, there are sets of high level principles that are wonderful. And some are heterogeneous in their level of detail and what they and how much they describe versus aspire to. And so you might say that the key considerations and the work in chapters 7 and 8 get into the next level of detail. We actually built a matrix that we've published in the last interim report that showed the DoD high-level AI ethics principles on one axis, and then the cross-referencing to all the recommendations we're making to show how they fit in, and working very closely with the JAIC on the actual the meshing. But it's a good question.
I think it's really important that people understand that, and it's in the report, there is a process of due diligence that has to be applied here. It can't just be the terminology. That's why there's meaningful implementation steps that we talk about. For example, the test evaluation, validation, and verification. That has to be to a standard. Of course, as an engineer, I believe that engineering can solve all ills. So I'm naturally going to think about how systems that we could design would help us validate that we are within our norms and within our standards. But I don't think that's out of concert. We've done this in the past. Our MISC systems that we use today have system implementations that prevent malign use of it if it falls into hands that would not use it appropriately. So this concept of doing work to validate that we have what we want for our values and our systems and our utility of this application is it's necessary for our nation to accept it.
And thanks, Katrina. And to reiterate, Eric, the work of the DIB and the DoD in executing on making those principles, DoD principles, for all the agencies is absolutely stunning and heartening to see. So we took those which came on board over the process of the NSCAI LOE 6 work and acted very consistently with those principles, taking things to the next level, as we said, of detail.
I would like to use a question from the audience from Andy Leher. His question is, what role can runtime assurance capabilities play in ensuring that AI autonomous systems operate within acceptable bounds? So Dr. Horowitz, over to you or any other commissioners that want to answer this question.
Yeah, there's been a strong body of work. within and outside of AI on runtime verification. One of the ideas here is that given the complexity of an AI system, you can have a simpler system with simpler rules and constraints overseeing and keeping the more complicated AI system in bounds per guardrails. It's a great idea, and that's definitely a direction of research.
Yeah, it's also sort of standard practice in safety critical systems like self-driving vehicles. It's an area where there are academic researchers who've really brought forward that area in the last few years. And as you're going to see when we're discussing areas for research investment, that is a really important one to continue to invest in.
Yeah, let me just say that for people enamored with modern technology, I refer you back to the fail-safe technology literature, starting with the innovation of the air brake. And we want those kinds of technologies running in our more advanced systems as well.
Yeah, I would also just generalize that more to the notion of supervisory systems. So, you know, we have this well understood metaphor, not just in technology, but also in society, of supervisory systems and checks and balances. And those same principles apply to networks of autonomous systems as they get more and more complex.
Okay, Dr. Horowitz, thank you so much for this. We will take the conversation and update the chapter accordingly. If no other questions or comments or alibis on this chapter, I'll ask you, Dr. Horowitz, to move on to chapter 8, upholding democratic values, and over to you for the presentation.
Yeah, we decided it was important to do a deep dive in privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights with regards to AI uses for national security. So our line of effort on ethics and responsible AI dedicated considerable attention to these concerns. In the Commission's interim report, we noted that there are important ongoing discussions and debates in our nation about how to use AI systems domestically in ways that preserve civil rights and liberties. AI technologies offer novel capabilities for intelligence, homeland security, and law enforcement. We just heard from Jason's presentation. But at the same time, rising capabilities raise a number of concerns, difficult questions, and challenges with respect to privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights. So we cite a number of these considerations in our report. Some of these include the concern that AI-powered analytics, while they can help officials process and make sense of large amounts of data, they also can be used to form a revealing picture of a person's activities, locations, and longer-term behavioral patterns. While this brings the possibility of new insights for analysts, it also raises questions about the proper scope and authorization, for example, border or law enforcement searches. Also, much of the information is personally identifiable and to date is collected and held by private companies as part of e-commerce. Our modern digital life raises constitutional questions such as whether and when individuals have a reasonable expectation of privacy when providing information to third parties like technology firms, and under what circumstances government agencies may access and use that data for a legitimate national security purpose. AI can help automate aspects of data collection and analysis, for instance, by detecting patterns or pinpointing threats, but it also raises questions about the proper roles of machine and human analysis in these processes, including in making inferences such as judgments about risk and predictions about outcomes, things happening now as well as in the future. So AI models and associated behaviors can evolve based on changing data and interaction with other components, such as sensors and other AI components that may be part of analytical pipelines that lead to unexpected outcomes with inferences. Performance can also change with changes in situation or context, where a system is constructed and tested with data from a different context than where it's used. As a result, AI systems require more continuous testing and evaluation over time. And with any kind of change in location or population it's directed at, or situations, much more so than prior generations of technology. Also, unintended biases can be introduced during multiple stages of the machine learning process, and this could lead to disparate behaviors and influences on different groups of people across American society. This problem has been documented in multiple contexts, including law enforcement situations. So Americans have valid concerns that AI applications used for security and public safety purposes, especially those involving facial recognition and other biometric technologies, or the analysis of aggregated personal data, these technologies will invade their privacy, restrict their freedoms of speech and assembly, and reinforce bias and discrimination. So emerging AI technologies, in summary, show promise for enhancing national security. They can assist US intelligence, homeland security, and law enforcement with growing security challenges. But to do so, the government must ensure their use is effective, legitimate, and lawful. Public trust is going to hinge on justified assurance of compliance with privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights. So in its approach to domestically adopt AI for national security, the US must uphold and bolster respect for democratic values, including privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights. And to this end, for my framing remarks, we make the following recommendations. We recommend that the government should invest in and adopt AI tools to enhance oversight and auditing in support of privacy and civil liberties. This includes examining current and emerging practices to improve the auditing of AI systems. Second, we recommend improving public transparency about how the government uses AI. The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI should publish civil rights and civil liberties reports for each new AI system or significant system refresh, and improve practices such that they provide a more holistic view of the role of AI systems before they are fielded. Third, we recommend that systems should be developed and tested with the goal of advancing privacy, preservation, and fairness. Agencies should actually assess the risks in AI systems to privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights of US persons, take measures to mitigate them, and document accepted risks. In doing so, they should adopt relevant practices we pointed out in our key considerations work. Agencies should identify an office, committee, or team in each organization that will conduct a pre-deployment review of AI technologies that will impact privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights. And the government should establish third-party independent testing centers for national security-related AI systems that could impact US persons. This testing should be mandatory for high-stakes systems, but otherwise voluntary, yet recommended. A fourth recommendation is to strengthen the ability of those impacted by government actions involving AI so that they have the ability to seek redress and to have due process. To start, we recommend a review of DHS and FBI policies and practices. They may impact due process and the fundamental ability to seek redress. We recommend that the Attorney General issue guidance on AI and due process. A fifth recommendation is to strengthen oversight mechanisms to address current and evolving concerns in 4 ways. The government should establish a task force to assess privacy and civil liberties implications of AI and emerging technologies, make near-term legislative and policy recommendations for AI development and use, and propose institutional changes to ensure sustained assessment and recurring guidance in this realm. Second, the government should strengthen the ability of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board to provide meaningful oversight and advice on AI use for national security. And third, we recommend that the DHS Offices of Privacy and Civil Rights and Civil Liberties be empowered to play an integral role in the legal and approval processes for the procurement and use of AI-enabled systems, including associated data that's accessed and used by the systems. And finally, as part of strengthening oversight mechanisms, we recommend requiring that there be stronger coordination and alignment among federal oversight and audit organizations so as to ensure agency compliance with AI documentation and testing requirements and to overcome impediments to AI audit and oversight. So I said a lot of things. I want to summarize. We're looking for a US approach for domestic adoption of AI for national security to strengthen and provide for oversight and auditing in support of privacy and civil liberties, transparency about AI use, recommended practices and baseline standards for AI system development and testing, the ability to contest AI decisions, and the legal and regulatory controls on how AI is used. Let me turn things over now to Illy and discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Horowitz. And I'm opening up to comments, questions, feedback from other commissioners.
I'll just say there was a good, healthy discussion on, are we going to create something that slows down the application and use of AI? And I think that we will continue, and I think it would be reflected in our implementation plan, that we have to do this, and we have to do it efficiently and effectively, but we have to avoid a bureaucracy. And so as we have this conversation, the need is paramount. It ties to all of the things that we talk about in this whole report. The society will not adopt. It can cause us more pain than gain. So we have to do it. The question is, how can we do this appropriately and with the least amount of impedance towards the speed that we need for getting to AI?
I think this is one of those cases where a heterogeneous approach could solve certain parts of the problem. It's not all of it, but having algorithms being developed to check for bias, for checking for violations of privacy, right? I mean, we can apply it in different ways, and we should use a multi-pronged strategy. I think the challenge we have with machines is that they do things at machine speed and at scale. So if you want to have a bias algorithm, or an algorithm goes bias on you, it does it at speed and scale. So we need appropriate systems that check that as well.
Eric, I got a question that we've discussed, but I want to be really clear here, is the focus on AI as the area where we have to be responsible. And specifically, as we've also discussed, there are plenty of cases where I, in my professional life, have mixed technologies which arguably weren't AI, but they were very arguably unethical. And so what I don't want to happen is a world where folks start playing with what counts as AI or not AI in order to sort of avoid scrutiny by some government or other processes. Whereas in fact, I think we all agree that it's automation generally, whether it's officially entitled AI or not, we have to put it through the same degree of scrutiny. There's plenty of statistical credit scoring algorithms which have been around for 25 years, which have some of these bias concerns, but they would probably call themselves statistical models. Similarly for operations research, control theory, or medical imaging. So do you think there's any danger from the fact that we keep emphasizing responsible AI versus responsible technology generally?
Well, I think it's a good comment, Andrew, and certainly AI, the new kinds of automation and capabilities coming with AI to do new kinds of things have raised these issues to higher levels of salience than they've been maybe raised in the past. I wasn't going to ask you about the unethical things you've done in the past with technology for your comment, but let me just say that we might want to broaden how we describe things to data-centric. When it comes to privacy, I don't personally just discriminate between AI technologies and something that a statistician might say, no, that's just statistics, that's just regression. So I think we want to be careful and point out that we mean we're referring to AI broadly when it comes to automation and a set of technologies that can leverage data, for example, and do the same kind of generalization in other areas like control, where there might be biases, or analyzing potential costly outcomes of various versions of false positive, false negative, or poor controls in a control theoretic system. So let's think more about how to make sure that we don't take the label AI and just talk about things that an AI researcher would call mainstream AI when it comes to the concerns and the guidance.
So I'd have to add, when I was working in the government, we almost excruciatingly caused ourselves pain when we were looking at application of rule setting. And so having some experience there, I think when we are talking, we ought to, and we have had the debate about what internal mechanisms exist in the organizations already that we could leverage. And it's going to be ultimately the humans. There's going to be a need to have people understand themselves. And fortunately, as a society, we're already biased towards the ethical and useful. And it's really going to be focusing on how do we validate that implementation the appropriate way? Not so much, I think, on is it ethical or moral, or has it been utilized the appropriate way, but rather can they prove it? And I think that's going to be where our challenge rises.
So I would like to ask a couple of questions we received online. First question from Kolja Verhage. Are there any thoughts on how government can offset the impact or cost on the algorithm supply chain by the potential imposition of ethical and unbiased performance requirements for AI algorithms? Second question, how would you recommend empowering this is from Cindy. How would you recommend empowering responsible AI leads so that individuals have the authority needed to ensure AI systems aren't fielded unless they meet an agency's safety and ethical thresholds? And last question from Jack Paulson, does the NSCAI assess that the DoD usage of Clearview AI, X-Mode, and EverAlbum DBA Paravision violated the AI principles commitment to auditable data? So Dr. Horowitz, I'll turn over to you, but any other commissioners that wants to chime in on these, any questions we received? Thank you.
Yeah, these are all rich questions, and we take, I'd love to share out the discussion with the whole commission. On the first, when it comes to the essential requirements, there's no getting around them. This country cannot afford to build systems that are inconsistent with its values and with key considerations of privacy and civil liberties. So if it costs more, that's who we are. On slowing down, we have to be careful to address these issues with as much efficiency as we can garner. In some ways, if there is some sluggishness introduced in the system and some grumpiness because of what we're asking as a society and require of our systems, so be it. When it comes to empowering responsible AI leads, I think we're talking not just education and empowerment, but cultural and requirements and scorecards for agencies, and that come with that are empowered by being transparent to the agencies and to the public. The last question is interesting to me. In fact, we had a recent discussion just this week on the reports that the Defense and Intelligence Agency was making use of private location data purchased, which brought us into looking very carefully at the Carpenter versus U.S. Supreme Court decision, which was about the idea that the government would needs a warrant when it comes to law enforcement for GPS data, for example, in the case that was discussed by the Supreme Court, when it comes to a individual's expectations of privacy, when it comes to something as sensitive as location data. We have to note that it's going to be important for Congress and the judiciary to assess the adequacy of current legal constraints over the federal government's obtaining and use of third-party data, including data acquired from data brokers. The current state is, where we are legally, is that it's not clear if and how the courts will apply Carpenter when the government, acting in a foreign surveillance, foreign intelligence capacity, or in a national security context, decides to access and use private commercial data that reveals, for example, the location of US persons. So I think this is to be noted. It's a big discussion area. Some members of civil society are concerned that the third-party doctrine should not justify the warrantless receipt of data. because people collecting the location data from consumers are selling it as data brokers do not transparently disclose how data will be used beyond the initial collection purpose. And so they don't receive sufficient consent from consumers. So this will be an ongoing discussion in our society, I think. I expect this to probably head up to the Supreme Court.
I just want to emphasize my complete agreement with what Eric said. This will slow us down, but it's pretty much essential. But the only danger will be if someone tries to hope or believe that, no, being responsible is just a little extra piece of work we have to do. Being responsible does change the nature of artificial intelligence work. It has many advantages aside from the fact that we are trying to we live in a democracy where we care about human rights, but it does require work. The important point, sort of following on from Eric, is that some of these decisions about how to use data or what's okay or not, we don't want AI professionals such as ourselves to be making them. These are things that elected officials and or the court, the justice system, and sometimes even international bodies needs to make decisions on. Then we technologists can make sure that we have carefully implemented that. You're not going to see AI ethics or justice dealt with just by us technologists. You actually need you need real societal decision making.
Yeah, I think there's a growing body of law that needs to grow a lot more, both domestically and internationally, as it relates to data. You know, the Europeans have a different view than the Americans, which have a different view than the Asians, and you're leaving the world kind of up to its own self to monitor, and that's usually not a really good place to be, particularly when you can put information together. There's an old doctrine in national security that you can take a bunch of unclassified data and munge it together and present it in a different way that together becomes something that's classified. You know, the same thing should hold true when it comes to privacy. You know, here's a piece of information that doesn't look like has personally identifiable information, and this piece over here looks like it's anonymized. But when you munge it all together, it has a clear review. This is a body of work that needs to be worked on and needs great legal minds to work on it. I don't think we should just wait until a court case shows up before we deal with it.
We also mentioned in prior interim reporting that getting these issues right per recommendations and guidance will be very important for working with, for example, our NATO partners who are very sensitive on the privacy and civil liberties front as well.
So I'd like to thank everybody because with this conversation, we conclude sort of like going over all the chapters except Dr. Griffith's chapter on part 1 of our final report, which is called Defending America. As Bob Work mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, the first 8 chapters really are focused on how we address the major challenges associated with organizing and resourcing DoD, IC, and other national security departments and agencies to think, organize, train, and operate, and adopt as fast as they can AI technologies to defend against AI threats. And then Dr. Horowitz just went over the sections of how we can adopt AI in a responsible and ethical way for national security purposes. And then how is the government use of AI consistent with the rule of law to protect Americans. Part 2 that I would like to introduce now is really focused on winning the AI technology competition. It has 8 chapters, but we will only go through the chapter 1, which I think sets the stage for tomorrow's conversation. And it situates AI in a broader national security context. And it talks about how we need to develop national technology strategy to ensure that the United States has the right mix of policies to promote AI talent and innovation, preserve our hardware advantages, and protect American intellectual property and the integrity of open research environment from adversaries. I would say that the next 8 chapters really provide the baseline or the foundation for the United States next national technology strategy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Darby one more time to provide us with just a quick overview and then open up to the conversation. Chris.
Thanks, Ely. And the notion of a quick overview wasn't lost on me, Ely. I will. I'll move fast. Chapter 9 focuses on empowering an entity within the White House to develop a comprehensive technology strategy at the national level to promote and coordinate leadership across the scientific, economic, and security aspects of AI, and the constellation of adjacent emerging technologies. This chapter also includes a recommendation, importantly, to establish a high-level U.S.-China comprehensive science and technology dialogue. We've seen that the race to develop, deploy in AI and associated technologies is already intensifying the strategic competition with both China and Russia. China, however, has moved more quickly and with more determination than the United States, guided by a set of AI plans for both AI and for adjacent technologies, connecting government ministries, universities, and companies. To retain our innovation leadership in the world, the United States needs an entity in the White House to develop and drive a stronger, long-term, government-led national technology strategy. Implemented successfully, the strategy will integrate promotion and protection policies and link investments in AI to a larger constellation of related emerging technology investments consistent with a broader national vision and strategy. Specifically, we have 3 recommendations. First, the Commission proposes creating a new Technology Competitiveness Council, or TCC, because we need an acronym, which would be chaired by the Vice President with a newly appointed Assistant to the President for Technology Competitiveness, serving as the day-to-day leader. The TTC would convene White House leaders and cabinet secretaries across the interagencies who hold equities in the protection and promotion of emerging technologies. The TCC would fill the gaps between the entities rather than replacing existing bodies led by NSC, NEC, or the newly elevated OSTP. It would provide a forum for reconciling competing security, economic, and scientific priorities, and elevate technology policies from the tactical to the strategic level. The newly created Assistant to the President for Technology Competitiveness would be responsible for ensuring that policies pertaining to emerging technologies receive sufficient President-level attention. Secondly, once established, the TCC should draft a national technology strategy, building on the elements presented in chapters 10 through 16 of this Commission's final report, and intended to guide U.S. policy across all emerging technologies. The strategy should weigh the difficult trade-offs between competing policy interests and priorities, identify critical technologies where competitors have sought to match, or in many cases overtake U.S. leadership, and facilitate an integrated policy approach to emerging technologies across the executive branch, and importantly, in coordination with both academia and industry. And finally, the U.S. should combine its commitment to winning the strategic competition with a regular, high-level diplomatic dialogue with China that benefits the American people and remains faithful to our allies, pressing China to abide by international norms. The dialogue should focus on the challenges presented by emerging technologies, to include AI, biotechnology, and other technologies that's agreed to by both sides. It should have 2 overarching objectives. First, identifying targeted areas of cooperation on emerging technologies to solve the global challenges such as climate change, national disaster relief, and assorted human interest areas. And secondly, it should provide a forum to where discrete concerns around specific uses of emerging technologies while building relationships and establishing processes between the 2 nations. So with that, I will now open it to the floor for discussion on these 3 recommendations. Ely, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Over to you, commissioners. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I think this is a good preview of what to expect tomorrow. This is just a 30,000-foot level oversight of the entire part 2 with some 3 key recommendations on how we have to address the technology competition. But over to you for conversation.
Well, this is Eric. I'm very interested in this question of national competitiveness, and I look forward to the discussion tomorrow about what those components are. But maybe I should comment then as opposed to now.
Thank you.
I think this is an excellent place for the combination of the discussion about the speed and the accuracy, as well as all of the whole of government response that we need to take to firmly keep our position and our like-minded countries align with us so that we can drive what we believe is the appropriate use and application of this science. I can't, this whole concept of having a technology that we know is ubiquitous, as we state in the beginning, and getting to the point where we have everyone focused in on making sure that as we as a nation use it, apply it, keep not only a good defensive posture, but have a useful economic engine that helps our country, can't overstate it.
I also think it's important for us to find common ground with our competitors, to do things that are good for both countries as well as for the world. AI and ML has so much power that, you know, could be used for power of evil, or could be used for power of good. And I think, you know, this is more than just us being a competitor with another nation state, but also taking kind of the leadership position of saying, we're willing to commit to use AI and ML in ways that move society forward, right? These are things we could work together on. And I think the more responsible common grounds nation states can find between each other, the less tension we can have in the world.
Yeah, if I can just follow that up with a question to Chris to sort of clarify, I think it's fair to say that it is absolutely not the message, or in fact, it's an anti-message of this report that we don't want to see Chinese scientists and US scientists working together on things towards the common good. We are not expecting to try to disrupt the general international collaboration between countries all around the world in improving the human good. And so I just want to be sure that we don't have the headline of this something like a recommendation to break ties with certain countries on research.
Yeah, Eric, it's Andrew, it's Chris. It's exactly the opposite of that. What we're doing is we're saying we need to reach out and we need to establish a dialogue in those areas that make sense for humanity. One of the reasons why I've been so focused on the intersection set of AI and bio is that it does have the potential to solve for food, for health, for production and sustainability. These are global issues, and we share those issues the same way that China does. And I think we can provide a foundational level of discussion that is productive and could be levered to have some of the more difficult conversations down the road. So very much in agreement with your clarification and point.
So given that we have a couple of minutes left, I'm going to ask some questions that were posted online. Jason, maybe this is for you, a question from Peter McKinnon. He's asking, how does this TCC compare with the new National AI Initiative approved by Congress on December 3rd? I think they're complementary, and I think they'll just reinforce like the top-down leadership push that we need to get the AI right. We've worked closely with OSTP, so we fully support them. But Jason, over to you on this question.
That was great. Nothing to add, Illy. Thank you.
Then we have a question from Peter Brown, but I think, Peter, we will address this tomorrow when we talk about allies and partners. You're asking, will the proposed Technology Council have only an executive role, or will it involve Congress, particularly when it's considering possible international aspects of this important role? Jason, over to you again here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that there will certainly be a close connection to Congress. I mean, there would be a leg affairs or leg liaison that would be essential to this. And as Illy knows from his time at the White House and in the NSC, so much of the time in those environments are spent figuring out how to engage Congress and how to engage the agencies that are going to be responsible for the international aspects, such as State Department. And there is, this encouraging sign of having a new CSET bureau at state involved in tech diplomacy, which I think would be very strongly connected to this effort. Over.
Thank you, Jason. And then I would like to close with a couple of questions from Sarah from Politico. The first question is, do you expect the Biden administration to take a hardline policy against China and make AI a priority in the White House? The second question is, what is the first thing that the administration can do to implement some of the recommendations to counter China and act with the urgency you're arguing for? And lastly, if there were one or two things you would want DoD to take away from this report, what would that be? So those are three difficult questions, and I'll open up for any commissioners that want to take a stab at that.
So this is Eric. Let me try a couple. I think that the China question is really part of a broader China strategy. I know that the Biden administration is working on one, and I think it will be in the context of a China strategy, not as a separate thing. With respect to the DoD, I think this commission has consistently said that the biggest issue is talent, getting it, hiring it, promoting it, keeping it, getting the right people, getting them in the right place. And that's, I think, probably our universal answer to that question.
Yeah, this is Gilman on the China issue. I agree with Eric on the broader strategy. Look, this isn't about hardline or soft on China. This is about hardline on inappropriate use by any nation state, including China. We want to make sure AI and ML is used appropriately that benefits mankind and does not disadvantage the U.S. on national security issues. I think on the issue around the importance of immigration, it's important because the U.S. has an immense capability that has, helped build this country over the last several centuries, and that's, its ability to take talent from anywhere in the world, and make it uniquely American. I think we need to protect our IP and protect our technologies and make sure it doesn't get misused. Things like CFIUS, right, are really, really important in our toolbox to make sure technology isn't being misused. We do need a national technology competition plan. We need a strategy. It's clear the Chinese have announced multiple ones. They have decided as the nation on AI that they will move out. I think and I'm hopeful that the new president and his administration is going to take an equally serious approach. This is the foundation of great nation competition. There's going to be a fourth industrial revolution. It's probably going to be built a lot around this class of disruptive technology, and AI is going to be leading the way. And finally, we got to work with partners and allies. And the only way we can work with partners and allies is, we need to take the high moral grounds on what is appropriate use and what's not appropriate use and lead the way. If our competitors agree with us, then that's great. If they don't, then, that's where we take the hardline stance.
And we'll be getting more into this tomorrow and Eric, thanks for your comment about talent. I think you saw lots of nodding heads, yes. But we have to figure out how to remain and strengthen the US's ability to be a talent magnet versus a magnet facing the wrong way, repelling talent. And we'll be addressing, again, these issues and recommendations tomorrow.
Okay, so with that, I would like to close this. As I said, this is a preview of tomorrow's remaining chapters, which I think provide a good baseline foundation for the national technology strategy. Thank you, everybody. I know this has been a really fruitful day for at least us staff to get your feedback so we can refine the final report and come back to you again in February. I'll turn it over to Eric for any closing remarks. And after that, I'll turn it over to Angela as our DFO to close the day. Eric?
Yeah, I guess so. Thanks for our audience for participating in this open discussion about our report. Thank you for all your comments. And I look forward to tomorrow morning. And thank you for all attending.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks to all commissioners. Angela, over to you to close the day.
Thank you all for attending NSCAI's day one of its two-day virtual meeting to discuss the Commission's draft final report. This meeting stands adjourned until tomorrow, January 26, 2021 at 12.